David Brewster here, another Brewster's Millions of Rants, and this is guitar education and music theory. And I've had lots of people ask me about this over the years, like where I went to school or where I learned, about music theory or reading music and chord construction and modes and, how long I've been teaching and where I've taught and books I've had published and articles, in magazines and on websites. So I wanted to put this together just to kind of clear the air and let some of the viewers out there know a little bit more about my background. But we're also going to dive into some stuff that I've learned, in music school, also as an educator, working with students, and just some little insight and some things that might kind of shake things up a little bit as far as your practice routine and how you view scales and how you view the fretboard. So we're going to dive into some different things here, but it's going to help you. So here we go. So I'm an honors graduate from the Atlanta Institute of Music and, AIM down in Atlanta, Georgia. And that originally was a satellite school based, around GIT or MI out in Hollywood. And then they eventually opened, kind of a location in Atlanta. And eventually it became its own, school. But AIM's great. Tosin Abasi went there. There's a number of, famous or notable, musicians that have, graduated from there. But I learned a lot at AIM. It was the perfect school for me. It was very laid back. I really, worked well with the instructors. I definitely, made a lot of friends, and I'm still in contact with a lot of the instructors and friends that I made when I was in school. Definitely that was, a highlight of my experience as a musician, going to school and graduating with honors. And, it was one of the best, parts or moments of my life so far. I also have 10 books published with Hal Leonard, Center Stream, and Cherry Lane Publications. I've also written for Guitar Player Magazine over the last 5 to 6 years. Also written for Premier Guitar, Reverb.com, Fender Rocks, LouderThanHell.net, TheMusicEdge.com. There's a lot of websites I've written for in the past. But and definitely I've been teaching guitar and working with students, one-on-one since I was about 17. I started, teaching full-time at a local music store when I was still in high school. And that started the whole thing. And even, back then, I hadn't even gone to music school yet. I could barely read music, and I didn't really understand a lot of theory, but I could play. I could play by ear, I could help people and kind of work with them. So even though my knowledge and education was very limited when I started teaching, I could still do it. I could still help and motivate and inspire people even before I really understood music and music theory. And speaking of music theory and books, I have recommended this book, in other videos on this channel, but I'm going to recommend it again. And I'm going to continue to recommend this book until something better comes along, which I don't really know if anything ever is going to come along that's better. But the music theory book from Tom Kolb, which is from Hal Leonard, I've used that with students, for a long time now, like well over a decade. And I've recommended it to people that have asked, like what's a good music theory book for guitarist or for guitar. It's great. There's like little quizzes in there that kind of help you really, cement the information as you work through that book. I think there's audio examples, with ear training and stuff like that. It's a great book. So if you're looking for something to kind of help you wrap your head around music theory and understand a little bit more as far as the nuts and bolts of music, this is your book. And since we're talking about books, this is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin. I've also recommended that book in other lessons on this channel. But that book will definitely kind of shape or maybe reshape the way you think about music and the way you listen to music and everything. It's fascinating. Great book. And before we dive into the examples in this lesson, I wanted to talk just a little bit about learning and, comprehending something that you're learning on the guitar with music. And there are 4 stages of comprehension or learning, and this comes from psychology. So we're talking about your brain and your mind and the way you kind of process or handle this information, upstairs. So here's an image with the 4 stages of comprehension or learning. What I don't really see a lot of people out there talking about this is just the process of learning music and music theory and really, understanding your instrument and how all this works. And I've definitely talked to a lot of students. I've talked to people online or in person, and there seems to be a large group of people that have this one and done kind of attitude, where they read about it or they practice it or they learn it once and then they feel like they're done, or I've already learned that, or I've already read this, or I've already played this before. And that needs to stop. This one and done, I'm finished, I'm done. There's no finish line. This isn't a race. It's not like turning in like a spelling test or something when you were in grade school. This is totally different. So when you're working with technique and building your knowledge and ability and understanding with music, your ability and your technique is going to improve as you move forward. So things that you learned early on, later on, if you go back and review and work through some of that stuff from the early days or early stages, you're going to approach it or use it or see it, differently compared to how it was when you first learned it. So you have to constantly go back and review and kind of see, things that you've already worked on, maybe in a different light, or some new information kind of, in your head, and then you apply that or relate it to something you've already learned, and you might use it or play it or see it differently. So this is really important. And here's an image, and just remember this kind of, circle of arrows. Another thing I've noticed, a lot of people I've talked to or worked with, or just, noticed comments and stuff online, there seems to be this kind of anti-theory stance, with a lot of guitarists. And you don't really see that so much with other musicians, mainly guitarists. And I've talked to, some drummers and bassists that kind of have this anti-information, kind of stance. That doesn't make any sense to me, because I know when I was younger and first started wrapping my head around theory and started taking theory classes and reading music and studying classical guitar and eventually got into jazz and stuff like that, I'm a very curious person by nature. So it really bothered me that I didn't know the names of certain chords, or I didn't really know what scale I might have been playing just by doing something by ear. That really bothered me, and that motivated me to want to understand. And then I would talk to other musicians, like maybe somebody that was in like high school band or somebody that played piano, and they would use terminology and they would talk about music or theory or notes, and I had no idea what they were talking about. I'd hear them talk about modes or reading something on the staff or whatever, and I would be jealous. I'd kind of feel like I was missing out, and that really did motivate and steer me. Aside from working on music from people like Randy Rhoads or Steve Vai and Satriani, and some of these great kind of educational minds, Steve Morse and some of these players, that really inspired me too. But I motivated myself because I wanted to know. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know it all. I'm still a student. I mean, I'm a teacher, but I'm still learning, every day. Every time I pick up the guitar, I learn something different or new. So it's really important to just be open-minded, have open ears, open eyes. You never know where inspiration or a new idea is going to come from. Now, as far as some examples and some things I'm going to kind of share here, and these are things that I learned in school, or things that I noticed, helped a student that I was working with, or helped me directly, if it's something I was working on my own. But we're going to start with the major scale. We're going to learn a couple different approaches here and kind of map out some things differently on the fretboard. But we're going to be in A major, and we're going to start, with A major, basically the modal name's Ionian, and we're right here. Just A major and open position right there. And once you have that basic scale under your belt, one thing I learned in school that really opened my eyes, and I kind of had some little peeks or glimpses of this, but it wasn't until I was actually a student at AIM and we started talking about, scale positions, and we eventually started talking about modes and stuff. But this is something I learned in Atlanta. I think it was actually in a different key, but it's the same thing, like this. I basically just started an open position. There's A major right there, the same, the same fingering and shape that I just showed a second ago. But then when I came back down, I went back up a different way, like this. Same notes. then I did it again. And then I did it again. And then I did it again like this and extended it. And then I think I came down like this. But there I'm really just kind of showing you like the fretboard maybe in a different light, because there we're taking the same thing and we're fleshing out all these alternatives and different ways of navigating through that scale on the neck, which this is, you know, very important to understand. It makes the fretboard seem a little bit smaller, you know, once you really get this under your belt. And it really does. It kind of forces you to really understand and master that scale. Another thing I learned in school that really helped me was single string theory and single string soloing. And this did come from MI or GIT. And I think in the curriculum transfer to AIM, it just kind of appeared, you know, in some of the stuff that we worked on in the curriculum. But I have talked to people that graduated from AIM and MI, and they talked about how much this helped them, you know, kind of view the fretboard differently, and you really absorb, you know, scales and modes, you know, if you practice them this way. But we're going to take that same scale, you know, A major or A Ionian, and we're going to arrange it on one string like this. Same notes, but just played on the A string. So there's your A, B, C sharp, D, B, F sharp, G sharp, A. Another big door that I opened when I was a student in school was modes, and I was already kind of working with them, and I really was struggling. You know, I had a couple books that I was working from. I think I had a couple old Frank and Bali, you know, guitar player lessons I was working with, and I was just, you know, assembling all this information and books and, you know, guitar lessons and stuff, and I still just really had trouble. I think I had the Frank and Bali, you know, Modes No More Mystery video, and, you know, all this stuff, and I still just really had trouble. And then when I became a student at AIM and we started talking about modes and we actually started working with them and had, you know, open discussion where you could ask questions and stuff, the light bulbs came on. You know, it finally made like this just glowing sense where it was like, oh my gosh, I think I understand this. And the biggest hurdle I think I had, I was so focused on the scales and the fingerings and the notes, I didn't even pay any attention to the chords playing behind me. I was just, you know, super focused on the scale or the mode. And then, you know, through, you know, school and working with this stuff, I realized like the chord is almost more important than the notes of the scale. Obviously they're both essential, but without the chord, you don't really hear the mode. So let me show you what I mean. So if we just played the A major scale over an A major chord, it's going to sound like Ionian, right? There's A major, and then here's A Ionian. Fits perfectly like pieces of a puzzle. Now if we change that A major chord to B minor, or let's say B minor 7, play A major over the top of it, but we emphasize the note B, it's going to be a mode. It's going to sound like B Dorian. Same scale. Just changed, you know, played over a different chord, and it changes the sound and the function. All the way through, you know, all 7 modes, but you can kind of see right there, I'm just taking that scale and changing the chord, right? If we lock on to that B Dorian tonality, but then revisit the single string concept that we had earlier, we can basically do the same thing we did in A Ionian like this. We could move over to the B string and play B Dorian on a single string, like this. You know, and there's the same notes, but on the B string. Right? So here's an image to kind of help you see that. Once you have the single string scale under your belt, you can start exploring single string soloing. And this is really hard because you're limiting yourself to one string, and then you're coming up with licks and solos and phrases and stuff. So it really forces you to not only understand, you know, the fretboard and the notes that you're using, but you're really navigating the scale, you know, in a very unusual way, because we're doing this horizontal approach, you know, along the string like that, instead of this vertical, you know, kind of typical approach that you might see a lot of players use. But I'm just going to loop a chord progression using the TC Electronic Ditto looper, and the progression is going to be B minor, A major, G major 7, so there's a chord substitution or, you know, kind of a passing chord, and then E major, you know, something like this. Using that B Dorian on the B string and coming up with licks and leads and stuff. So this is totally improvised, but you can do some stuff like this. Just totally winging a solo right there. But you can see I just stayed on the B string and I was using bends and vibrato and legato and slides and all sorts of stuff. So try that. If you have a way to loop or record progression, you know, play single string soloing and just see what happens. That's going to wrap this episode of Brewster's Millions of Rants with guitar education and music theory. And I mean, I just kind of shared a few things, you know, near the end of this video or this rant. But there are thousands of things, if not tens of thousands or millions of things that you can uncover and learn and discover, you know, by studying music theory, by studying music. And definitely, you know, aside from just studying guitarists, you can learn a lot from studying other musicians, violinists, saxophonists, you know, whoever. There's tons of things that you can tap into and learn, but those doors are kind of closed until you really start to understand music and maybe read music, or you know, at least be able to adapt and kind of, you know, use and understand some of this information, because it's right there in front of you. But a lot of people seem to turn their nose up, or they get intimidated or scared, and you just have to dive into it. It's like a big murky ocean or something, and you just have to have a leap of faith and just dive in. And I know a lot of people feel like they're drowning as soon as they dive in, but you have to, you know, just try to get your footing and really, you know, just start chipping away at it. And it's going to take time. You know, I think a lot of people are in such a hurry, especially these days. But you have to just slow down and read and discuss and talk to people and friends or anybody you know that maybe knows a little bit about music and theory, and just really absorb it over time. And there's really no way to just cram it, which is what a lot of people are trying to do. They're trying to learn it like that. But this is going to take years, you know, just like anything else that you've learned how to do. Read and write a language, or you know, hang gliding, scuba diving, karate, whatever it is. It's like that. And there are steps and things that you should learn about and you know, kind of adhere to. And it's just, you know, it's time consuming. And I guess that's the big thing a lot of people are scared of. They're like, well, I don't really want to devote that much time. But, you know, depending on what level you're trying to reach, if you're trying to hit like Steve Morse, Steve Vai, and this upper tier, you know, it's going to take a lot of practice, a lot of time, hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of hours, 10,000 hours or whatever they say. But, you know, if you're not really that serious, and maybe you're like, well, I don't need to be Steve Vai, but I want to improve, you know, then you're going to have to, you know, devote some time and definitely just really push yourself in that direction. And at first it's going to be really hard and confusing. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to go right back to your comfort zone. But ignore that and just keep, returning to that same, information or the same book or the topic or whatever it is, and just attack it head on until you understand it. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Let Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.